is September 10th, 2023. You know, we have three peaks of activity in September. Right at the beginning, we had the Venus and Jupiter stations, and right at the end, we have a whole bunch of activity that's coming up around the 27th to the 29th of the month. But right now, we are at the middle peak of activity, and it is the new moon. And you're saying, but the new moon isn't really a peak of activity, Armand. It's kind of a low time. And it is, and it may well be, as a matter of fact, it may well be a low time in the week, in the month. But I'm not thinking that this one is going to be quite so low profile as new moons may be. We'll see. We'll see. First thing, though, is that this new moon is in Virgo. It is time to make a list of things that need to be done by the end of the year. Virgo is the sixth sign of the astrological year, which begins when the sun gets into Aries on March 21st or 20th every year. But it is the ninth month from Capricorn, which is New Year's Day and the solstice time and so on. So we're kind of looking into like the home stretch of the year, the home stretch of 2023. The relationship between the calendar and astrology is fascinating. We'll get to that someday. Someday we'll get to that. Maybe videos, maybe it'll probably be a book. There's a lot of interesting. I digress. Virgo, make a list of things that need to be done by the end of the year. What are the outstanding projects? You know, we've been through the summertime. Now we're starting to feel that we're going to get closer. You know, after September, October, then we're going to find ourselves in the holidays and all of that. So you kind of need to get stuff done in the near term. Focus on that. What needs to be done? But the new moon is on Thursday. New moon is fairly late on Thursday at 21 degrees of Virgo. Give yourself a little time. I would say, in terms of that to-do list, spend most of this week just sort of, meditating on it, just sort of considering where you might like to go with things as we move forward. As with any new moon, I tell you, it's a good time to set intentions, but not at the new moon. You set your intentions afterwards. Some probably like 12 hours after the new moon would, generally speaking, be a good rule. When you can see the crescent moon in the sky, it's usually like 2, sometimes 3 days later. That's a good time to put things into action. This time around, I think we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. We have the new moon on Thursday. The sun is trying to Uranus on Friday. That really feels like, boy, do we want to get going. But I would wait a little bit. I would hold off a little bit on that and maybe wait till Saturday. You'll still catch some of that sun-Uranus energy. Experience the enthusiasm of it Thursday, Friday, by all means. But I would maybe hold off on even making plans, because you'll probably have to, you make your to-do list, you'll probably have to go back and redo it. And why? Because Mercury stations to go direct on Friday, ending his 21-year retrograde. 21 days. That felt like 21 years, didn't it? Lots of things in this retrograde. Too many to list. But we know that we get some of the most prominent mercurial mishaps right around the stations. So Thursday, Friday, maybe even spilling into Saturday, we're likely to see some of the more dramatic effects of Mercury retrograde. It's not a great time to be making a list. We're checking it twice. We're very likely to have misinformation or miss out on things, and even taking action, probably better waiting until the earliest part of next week. So we are given a little bit of a caveat that we have the Virgo new moon, and we have Mercury stationing in Virgo, kind of futzing up the signals there. So probably Thursday, Friday, consider what might be on your to-do list. But the weekend is time enough to actually put it together, and next week is time enough to start acting on it. We do have the Leo moon that begins this week, and that should be fun and kind of nice. That's a good thing. And then we have some really interesting activity with the goddess asteroids. Let's start with this. Let's start with Juno. Juno is in Leo, and she meets with Venus, an exact conjunction on Sunday, early hours of Sunday. We really actually feel that a little bit more on Saturday, although the Cancer moon is not going to come. Venus and Jupiter really spend Venus and Juno really spend the entire month together. The rest of the month, they are conjunct exact on Sunday, the 10th, and they are conjunct again, I think, on the 27th or so at the end of the month. And they don't go very far from each other throughout the entire month. So Venus, if we just talk about relationships, Venus, what we want, what we value, and Juno, partnership, commitment, what we want and what we got, an opportunity to work these things out, to sort of put them on the same page. Especially good to keep in mind, this is happening in the sign of Leo. And so in the sign of Leo, you want to add a little bit of fun, not drama. You want to add a little bit of fun into the equation. You want to think about it, and a little bit of romance or something like that would be good. However, at midweek, Juno is going to square Jupiter. Now, in mythology, Juno is Jupiter's wife. Juno is about partnership, commitment. Jupiter, not so much. And so we have this square between Jupiter in Taurus, who kind of wants to do what feels good, and Juno in Leo, who, among other things, has a certain amount of pride about things and is only going to let things go so far. We'll see how that plays out. That is only really relevant to people who are in committed relationships, and probably the ones that began sometime around January, when Juno and Jupiter conjuncted on January 22nd. But you could just say sometime in January, the second half of January, if some relationship thing got started, either a new relationship or a new phase in the relationship, you might find back in January, you might find that you're sort of at a hinge point now. For most of us, I'm taking up your time for no good reason. If Juno and Venus are together, that means that Venus is going to go on to square Jupiter, and that does happen in the earliest hours of Sunday the 17th. So we're really going to be feeling it mostly Friday and Saturday of this week, because we feel the aspects as they build, then they peak, and then they kind of trail off over the course of time, unless it's the moon or something perks it up a little longer. So we have this aspect very prominent at the weekend. What does that mean? Okay, so it's a square aspect, and it might seem like it's going to be tense, but Venus is in Leo, and actually in Jupiter's decan section of Leo, and Jupiter is in Venus's home sign of Taurus. And so by what we call reception, they're really in a good space with each other. And besides, Venus and Jupiter it's never really much of a problem with these two. They're besties. There's no big problems with these two. About the biggest challenge, I would say, would be too much of a good thing. Too much of a good thing is a possibility. Maybe some people might stir up a little drama just for the sake of stirring up a little drama. I wouldn't think that that's particularly likely to be a problem, especially with the moon in Libra, but we'll see. For most of us, it's a great opportunity. The moon is waxing at least a little bit, and it sort of suggests going out, having some fun, doing what feels good. Maybe this is a weekend, maybe with Mercury stationing in the new moon. Maybe we understand that we have to come up with a to-do list, but maybe we'll defer that for a little while we just sort of have a nice time. That's a good idea. That's what I'm gonna do. Let's say that. Other asteroid stuff though. Juno's in the middle of Leo. The other three asteroid goddesses, Ceres is a planet, dwarf planet. The other three change signs. Ceres moves into Scorpio at midweek. Very likely has to, and that's very collective. This is going to play out in the collective. Very likely have to do with the probably has to do with hurricane season. And in Scorpio, it probably has to do with insurance. Insurance is likely to be a very prominent issue as hurricane season ends and we sort of survey the damages and who's going to pay for all of the things. And that's very likely. And I think we'll hear a lot more about what has happened on Maui in terms not so much of the disaster itself, but in terms of the fallout of the disaster. That's liable to be a big thing. Pallas Athene moves into the sign of Libra. Now, Pallas Athene is the truth teller asteroid. She's the goddess of wisdom who carries a spear. And she's going into the sign of Libra, and justice with the sword. Pallas Athene is very comfortable in Libra. I think this is really her sign. It's Venus's sign too, but it's her sign. And she really belongs there. And so we're likely to get much more in the way, and particularly this week, we're likely to get bits of information about justice, and we're likely to get it being delivered by prominent women. And then Vesta switches into the sign of Cancer. Now, Vesta is the goddess of the hearth, and she's a very Virgoan planet, but she really resonates with Cancer. And that's going to put a bit of a conservative vibe on things, not politically conservative, the other conservative, the more reserved vibe to things. But it also has a lot to do with questioning, where we value things that have to do with home, clan, country, and so on. But before they make the change, actually, Pallas Athene in Virgo will square Vesta in Gemini. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but I'm not quite sure what it means. Hey, let's talk about this. Last week, I said to watch the markets and finances. Last week, the first week in September, because Venus changing direction and Jupiter changing direction were likely to give us clues for what's going to happen for the end of the year. And the news was not particularly good. Now, I'll explain in a moment, but if you follow the markets through 2023, they went pretty far on an upward trend, and then Venus stationed to retrograde, and they fell throughout the retrograde, and then stations to go direct. Jupiter is in the very financially oriented sign of Taurus. He kind of scooped in and saved up the whole banking crisis and all of that earlier in the year. And he's been going direct. And that has been another positive indicator for finances and the economy and so on. And now Venus is turned around to go direct. And we think that might have been a helpful thing. And Jupiter stations to retrograde, and we're not so sure about that. So the indicator from last week, and we'll have to see if this really does hold true, the indicator from last week was that the rest of the year is liable to have some bumps in the economy. That's certainly true of the markets. I would think that we'll hear more about banking issues than we've been hearing about in recent months. And of course, inflation data. Jupiter retrograde in Taurus ought to be kind of good for inflation, but let's not presume on things. Again, pay attention to finances in the markets, in part because they really do affect us all and they affect the economy, and we're part of that. But also, too, they're very, very good gauge of the collective psyche. And the astrological weather, each of us individually can rise above. As individuals, we can feel tension and say, oh, I'm not going to react to it. If we know one of the values of these forecasts, other than knowing which weekend day is a good night to go out, I would say both this week, both of them should be good, especially Saturday. But other than that, when there is some tension, you say, oh, well, I'm really impatient, but today's a Uranus station. Or, yeah, things are messing up. It's a Mercury station. And it helps us to get a little perspective on things, to distance ourselves from what's happening. We can do that as individuals. Collectively, it's really difficult. Collectively, the least common denominator tends to prevail. And so when we look at the markets, when we look at politics, but whew, that's too much. When we look even sometimes at sporting events, and we look at the issues in the news that are grabbing everybody's attention, we're getting a feel for where the collective is going. And that's important because we swim around in the collective. That isn't a thing that happens out there. That's where we live our lives. And so we can get on top. I mean, psychologists have been saying for, a century, they've been talking about groupthink and about, about mass psychosis and things like that. But it is really the case that the collective behaves in a really kind of baseline way. And it matters. It matters. It's important to know what others are doing, what others are thinking. And so let's see what happens. Let's see what happens with the markets and everything else. Hey, we've got, a couple more months of 2023 to go.